Meredith and Mark's entanglement was fraught with complications from the very start. Beyond being co-workers, Mark carried the weight of a 20-year marriage. Professional boundaries dissolved into something deeper, a drift toward infidelity that felt almost unintentional. Initially, their world remained strictly confidential. Clandestine encounters and digital whispers defined their hidden reality. For Meredith, it filled a marital void. For Mark, it offered respite from a suffocating domestic cycle. Yet, as their intimacy intensified, a silent observer began to piece the truth together, someone with no intention of walking away. The Meredith Sullivan investigation file. Forensics provide the silent testimony needed to piece together a killer's path. To grasp the crime, we must first dissect the psychology of those involved. Welcome to the file. I am Angel, and this is our investigation. Tell me your location in the comments. It is fascinating to see how far these narratives reach. Ensure you are subscribed with alerts active to never miss a new report. Please support the channel with a like before the conclusion. Let us step inside the crime scene and examine the evidence. Screams shattered the peace of a quiet suburb on April 23, 2018. Initial reports suggested a scene of utter chaos. Authorities arrived quickly, unaware they were walking into a nightmare. Inside the kitchen, officers discovered 2 women bleeding from gunshot wounds. No intruders were found, suggesting the violence had just concluded. This wasn't merely a random act of violence. It was the climax of a long-simmering, invisible conflict. A distraught man stood outside, trembling as police secured the perimeter. He was the witness who first stumbled upon the carnage. His ties to both victims instantly placed him at the center of the probe. Detectives initially suspected a crime of passion fueled by betrayal. 2 women sharing 1 man in a locked room. However, the discovery of a firearm beneath the victim's body shifted the narrative. Ballistics and weapon placement suggested a far more intimate tragedy. Evidence suggested a personal collision rather than an outside threat. Identification soon confirmed the identities of the fallen. Meredith Lynn Sullivan, 33, and Gina Gerardo, 47, appeared to be strangers. Yet, a single name connected them: Mark Gerardo. Meredith was the mistress, Gina, the wife of over 20 years. What seemed sudden was actually a slow burn tension. Years of resentment finally reached a lethal boiling point. To understand the tragedy, we must look closer at the women involved. Meredith Lynn Sullivan was born January 17, 1985, New York. Raised by parents Andrew and Faye alongside 2 older siblings, her structured upbringing paved a clear path toward professional success. She pursued higher education in communications and social sciences. Meredith wasn't just a student. She was a standout achiever. Her life was a blur of athletics, theater, and creative ambition. Radio broadcasting sparked her lifelong passion for strategic media. His reputation steadily climbed, bolstered by an academically lauded documentary project. Post-training, he navigated the high-stakes corridors of political circles. Her professional ascent was remarkably swift. She emerged as a driven, meticulous figure within the public eye. University life introduced Meredith to Luke Chapman, a fellow legal scholar. Their union accelerated into a marriage that projected perfect ideological alignment. High-pressure roles in politics and academia defined their daily existence. They maintained a facade of success until the internal clockwork began to fail. Ruling shifts and dwindling shared hours took their toll. A lack of domestic vision carved out a growing psychological void. They shared a roof and politeness, but the warmth had evaporated. Lives decoupled through separate ledgers and strictly utilitarian dialogue. Publicly functional, their private connection had long since withered. By 2017, she was a fixture in her academic field. Meredith sought a new architect for her marketing operations. The criteria: seasoned expertise and a talent for high-level command. 46-year-old Mark Gerardo stood alone at the top of the list. He brought a heavy resume of design and marketing credentials. His poise and articulate nature left Meredith thoroughly impressed. Relocating from North Carolina, he integrated into the team with unsettling ease. They operated in tandem, mastering complex tasks with precision. Efficiency forged a professional bond that appeared unbreakable. Soon, that synergy leaked into their fracturing personal realities. Born in 1968, Mark was forged by a rigid, disciplined upbringing. This grit anchored a steady climb through the marketing industry. At 18, he crossed paths with Gina Cox. Their history of departures and returns eventually culminated in marriage. For over 20 years, they modeled a picture of suburban permanence. Childless and methodical, they lived by a strictly calibrated clock. Financial cracks and family deaths eventually compromised that stability. A collapsed business venture pushed their domestic peace to the brink. Attempts at reconciliation could not bridge the widening gap. These scars would ultimately dictate his future trajectory. What began in the boardroom between Meredith and Mark soon pivoted. The professional veneer started to give way to something else. Late nights and shared secrets replaced the standard office protocol. Two people drifting at home found a dangerous anchor in each other. Meredith eventually moved the conversation beyond the office walls. In that neutral space, the work talk finally stopped. Private vulnerabilities were exchanged, cementing a clandestine trust. That night, a boundary was crossed into a secret, parallel life. Clandestine meetings became a regular, shadow world routine. Their connection hardened into a vital, if hidden, emotional pillar. This workplace spark ignited a fire that would soon consume everything. As the calendar turned, Mark's behavior at home underwent a shift that was becoming impossible to ignore. He grew cold, his absences lengthened, and his daily rhythm fractured. Lacking proof, Gina still felt a profound sense of dread. Their recent relocation to an unfamiliar city only intensified her growing unease. Jobless and stripped of her support network, Gina's world rested entirely on the fragile stability of her marriage. Within this isolation, Mark's increasingly erratic demeanor fueled a deepening psychological uncertainty. His vague responses and calculated avoidance of her questions pushed the domestic tension to a breaking point. Choosing to avoid an immediate scene, Gina began a quiet, meticulous observation of her husband. Tiny discrepancies and sudden scheduling shifts eventually solidified her darkest suspicions. The betrayal was absolute. Mark was having an affair. Instinct had finally hardened into cold reality. This confirmation triggered a dangerous escalation of emotional and psychological turmoil. Driven by the need for truth, Gina sought undeniable evidence of his deception. She retained a private investigator to shadow Mark. In short order, the surveillance yielded exactly what she feared. The file contained damning photographs and records of his secret meetings with a woman named Meredith. With the evidence laid bare, the silence in the household finally shattered. Gina confronted Mark, who offered hollow justifications and a desperate vow to end the affair. Before the investigation continues, please subscribe and like this video if you find the story compelling. Your support allows us to bring these cases to light. Thank you. Now, back to the story. The promise was a lie. Despite being exposed, the connection with Meredith continued under a tighter veil of secrecy. Rather than de-escalating the crisis, this second betrayal sharpened Gina's resolve, turning her suspicion into a calculated pursuit. Their home became a vacuum of mistrust and deep-seated resentment, with a psychological pressure mounting toward an inevitable peak over the following weeks. Following the broken truce, Gina transitioned from a grieving wife to a woman of active vigilance. She took total control, surreptitiously planting a tracking device on Mark's car and installing spyware on his digital devices to monitor his every move and communication. Through this digital shadow, she confirmed the illicit romance with Meredith was still very much alive. The secret meetings persisted with more caution, but no less frequency. This certainty shattered Gina's remaining emotional stability. The marital dispute had evolved into something far darker, a total, consuming obsession. Gina's personal environment had become a psychological prison. Trapped in a new city without work or friends, she was financially tethered to a man who had already left. This isolation and betrayal pushed her toward an increasingly volatile mental state where constant surveillance and mounting pressure set the stage for a catastrophic confrontation. In early March 2018, the trajectory of the case took a definitive turn. Meredith finalized her divorce from Luke, removing the final legal barrier to her relationship with Mark. Emboldened by this, Mark made his own series of calculated moves. Though restricted from a formal divorce by residency laws, he abandoned Gina and moved into Meredith's home. The secret was dead. The betrayal was now their public reality. The two began to aggressively restructure their lives together, quitting their jobs and preparing for a fresh professional start in Pennsylvania. While they viewed this as a rebirth, Gina was left in the wreckage, abandoned and forced to face the fallout of a collapse she refused to accept. By early April 2018, Meredith settled into a new residence as part of this transition. She secured a high-level academic position, marking a significant milestone in her career advancement. Shortly after, Mark followed, having abandoned his old life for a new position in the same area. To any outsider, the picture was one of total stability. New careers and a shared home signaled a clean break from the past. Their once secret affair had finally solidified into a legitimate public life. Yet, this fresh start rested on a fractured foundation. As they settled into a routine, Gina's shadow lingered unseen. By then, she had meticulously mapped out their every move. Armed with their new address, she began monitoring them in secret. Throughout the weeks before April 23rd, Gina's behavior turned cold and calculated. Forensic investigators later pieced together her final preparations. She secured a handgun, a rental car, and nondescript clothing. These weren't random acts, but tactical milestones. She utilized her gathered intel to stalk the couple's daily patterns with precision. Their sanctuary was no secret. She memorized their timelines and their moments of solitude. Residents later remembered a strange car and an unfamiliar woman loitering nearby, though at the time, no one suspected anything sinister. April 23, 2018, was meant for a celebratory dinner marking their brand new chapter. Meredith headed back to the house alone to get ready. Mark waited at the table, but the minutes stretched into an agonizing silence as his texts went unread. Meanwhile, Gina was already lurking just outside the front door. After parking several blocks away, she waited for the exact moment Meredith was isolated. Utilizing her knowledge of the property, she slipped inside undetected, likely through a secluded garden entrance. Evidence suggests she intended to target both, but reality deviated from her dark blueprint. Meredith walked in solo. What followed remains a reconstruction based on forensics. The only souls present would never speak again. The meeting inside quickly spiraled into a fatal, high-tension confrontation. Gina drew the pre-purchased firearm and executed Meredith right there in the kitchen. Moments later, Gina turned the barrel on herself in that same bloody room. The carnage took only minutes, a brief explosion of violence. Yet it was the culmination of months of festering obsession. Then, a heavy silence descended until the discovery hours later. Simultaneously, Mark sat waiting in the restaurant, his anxiety mounting with every unanswered call. The silence was broken by a wave of frantic, unsettling messages from Gina herself. Her words dripped with rage, explicitly detailing her twisted perception of their reality. Panicked, Mark raced toward Meredith's residence. He arrived to find the lights blazing and the front door ajar. A strange car sat nearby, but he ignored it. Inside, the unnatural stillness was the first thing he felt. Entering the kitchen, he stumbled upon the horrific sight of both women on the floor. Paralyzed by shock, he fled outside screaming for help, prompting neighbors to call for emergency backup. This call officially launched the homicide-suicide investigation. Scrutinizing the scene revealed critical, overlooked details. Witnesses eventually recalled a dark Chevrolet and a suspicious woman hovering in the area days prior. Reports surfaced of a woman in a wig, yet nobody considered her a threat then. That woman was Gina, who had been hunting that house for 7 full days. Mark had actually jotted down the plate number earlier, never imagining the danger it held. Digging through the digital trail, detectives found Gina's emails to loved ones sent before the attack. These writings exposed a fractured psyche spiraling toward a violent conclusion. Every psychological thread was pulled to understand the killer's motive. Luke, Meredith's former husband, was scrutinized regarding financial motives involving her properties and insurance policies. Lacking any forensic link to the tragedy, investigators eventually cleared him of all suspicion. Following a review of forensic evidence, movement logs, and digital communications, authorities shuttered the case within days. The official report concluded that Gina had acted alone. The assailant first extinguished Meredith's life before ending their own. The evidence allowed for no other conclusion. The weapon, the fingerprints, and the calculated premeditation all pointed toward a single perpetrator. Initial theories regarding a wider conspiracy or outside involvement, including Mark or Meredith's ex-husband, were dismissed for lack of supporting evidence. The tragedy was categorized as a personal vendetta that reached a lethal, irreversible conclusion. Since the responsible party was deceased, legal proceedings were halted and the file was closed. Despite the official closure, the case continued to fuel intense public debate. Mark became a lightning rod for attention, even though he never faced formal charges. Scrutiny fell on the clandestine affair he had maintained for several months prior to the incident. 1 year later, he published a memoir sharing his perspective. The book was impactful, but sparked fierce backlash. Many observers felt he was profiting from a nightmare he helped set in motion. Simultaneously, a series of legal battles erupted. Meredith's relatives challenged the estate, accusing Luke of neglecting financial obligations following her death. The court eventually limited his liability. Ultimately, the two women were laid to rest in separate locations. Meredith was cremated. Her ashes returned to her family. Gina, meanwhile, was interred in her Indiana hometown. The fresh start Meredith and Mark envisioned perished within minutes inside a kitchen. Behind that scene lay weeks of stalking and a boiling tension that no one stopped. For many, one unsettling question remains. How can private choices spiral so violently into such an irreversible catastrophe? Gina acted alone, but everyone played a part. April 23, 2018, ended two lives. It was the moment a silent history finally surfaced in the most horrific way imaginable. That brings our investigation into this case to a close, dear listener. Join me next time as we dissect the dark details of history's most chilling crimes. Please like and share this video. Your support helps me continue creating this content. Until our next criminal case, goodbye. We often believe our private choices are ours alone, tucked away behind closed doors or encrypted whispers. But the haunting tragedy of the Meredith Sullivan case serves as a visceral reminder. Betrayal is never a victimless crime. What began as a clandestine escape for two people became the lethal catalyst for another soul pushed into a psychological abyss. Choices made in the shadows have a terrifying way of surfacing in the most horrific light. When we trade integrity for temporary solace, we don't just risk our own peace, we risk the safety and sanity of everyone anchored to our lives. This narrative isn't merely a true crime report. It is a profound warning about the fragility of the human heart when met with the crushing weight of absolute deception. The lesson is stark. If the foundation of your life is failing, find the courage to dismantle it with honesty rather than burning it down with lies. True character is not found in how we start new chapters, but in how we honor the endings of the old ones. Let us choose transparency over secrecy and empathy over obsession. Once the trigger of consequence is pulled, the damage is irreversible. The silence left in that kitchen is a scream for us all to do better.